Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Sumner Abraham. He's an internal medicine physician, and he wrote the Kevin MD article, A Letter to Medical Interns in the Midst of a Pandemic. Sumner, welcome to the show.
Kevin, thanks so much for having me. And it's funny to think that I thought that maybe the pandemic would have subsided, but we're still definitely in the midst of it, just as much as we were when this article was published. So thanks for having me.
So we'll get into the article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Yes, I'm a primary care physician in Oxford, Mississippi. I did medical school at the University of Mississippi and my training at the University of Virginia, served as a chief resident there. And then I'm back in Oxford, Mississippi, doing general internal medicine, and also an associate CMO of Relias Healthcare, which is a healthcare solutions company. I teach a bioethics course at the University of Mississippi, a class on death and dying, which has been very interesting in the midst of the pandemic, and then also work at a local hospice agency, which is kind of where a lot of my passion and my work really lies.
So we are now speaking in the second week of November, and we are on the cusp of another wave of the coronavirus pandemic. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing, and you could choose which role that you're seeing that through.
I think kind of two things that are becoming abundantly clear. The first is that the anxiety and the mental toll that this is taking on patients and physicians is very real. I think that it was easy at first for kind of the novelty of a disease or the excitement of kind of the doomsday prepping kind of gave folks a lot of adrenaline. I think is what you're seeing now is that this is very difficult for everybody in lots of different ways. I feel like I've done a lot more counseling and therapy and practice in the last several weeks than I ever really dreamt of doing, which has been fun. But it's clear that the mental toll on patients and physicians alike is very real. The other thing that we're seeing is the really cool opportunity, particularly as telehealth has started to come to be. And that's where the work with Relias Healthcare, a healthcare solutions company with the goal of trying to keep rural hospitals in the Deep South open and profitable, has been really interesting to see how telemedicine has been life-giving to those local institutions.
All right, so let's talk about that Kevin MD article now, A Letter to Medical Interns in the Midst of a Pandemic. Now, for those who haven't read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Yeah, one of the things serving as a chief that we did was obviously recruit and try to have a robust class of incoming interns. And something that was very clear talking to fourth-year medical students, soon to be our interns on match day, was the profound sense of disappointment, that match day was abnormal, that they didn't know what the transition was going to look like. I was kind of unsettled by that because everybody, when they transition to training or transition to a new job, there is a sense of disruption, and the pandemic just kind of amplified that a little bit. And so I wanted to essentially kind of have a peek behind the curtain, things that you are not taught in medical school but are vital to your job and transitioning to a full-time position, on how to think through those, and how that this pandemic is actually going to highlight those aspects of your work that are the most life-giving and rewarding, despite it kind of sensing to be some sort of disruption.
Now, tell me some of those tips. So not only for the medical students transitioning to be interns, but you yourself was a chief resident transitioning in to be an attending. So what are some transition tips that you offer, especially during the pandemic?
One of the things that I've tried to remind myself every day is this idea of of learning how to act amidst uncertainty, not in spite of it. And I feel like that whether it's medical school or in your residency training, that you're trying to make decisions based off of a likelihood ratio or the certainty that a disease might be present. But I think one of the most powerful things you can learn, and that I've learned and I'm still trying to learn in my practice, is that I'm actually going to be the best physician that I can be when I'm acting in the midst of that uncertainty and kind of holding that. And I think that is vitally important. I think another thing that is talked about all the time is physician burnout and kind of what that is. And one of the things I talk about in the article is this idea that maybe what we're the most frustrated by is things are not what we really expected. And it's hard for us to make sense of all this hard work that I did to get me to this point, and you arrive at that destination and it's disappointing because it's not what you expected.
Mm-hmm.
And that to kind of lean into that, and to not for that to be frustrating to you. But really what makes our work meaningful is kind of this admission that our work is always a work in progress. And I think that even just the term practice, I think we take that for granted. And I think that that's something, especially when you're learning a new disease, and it's easy to get cynical about donning and doffing the PPE and kind of some of the anxieties that come with taking care of a new infectious disease. I think that really just that this admission that our work is always a work in progress, I think is important. And then two, I think that patient stories, right? I mean, that is so easy to overlook, and it sounds cliche, but really the story of the person who's in front of you really is the only way to keep pressing in, and to continue to care for the next patient in the best possible way. And that takes time, kind of trying to fight against this idea that time is the enemy and that you're racing against the clock. But a little, one open-ended question can go a long way. And so I think really this idea of narrative medicine, I think, is as important as it's ever been.
So on this podcast, I've talked to several medical students, especially fourth-year medical students. And one of the things that they regret is that essentially a third to a quarter of their last year of medical school was wiped out because of the pandemic. Now they're interns. And I was wondering if you could give some actionable tips or scenarios that they may encounter during their first 6 months of internship that could help ease them through the transition in the midst of a pandemic.
I often think about those first months of nights, where you're working a lot of nights and you're making a lot of little minuscule decisions, replacing potassium, giving a Lasix dose, helping patients sleep with any sort of medication. I would actually try to encourage people to look at every EMR that you're looking at, look at every patient chart as if that is a patient and their patient story, because that makes it a lot easier to give that next dose of Lasix, to give a Tylenol or anything like that in the middle of the night. And I think that that's vital. I think that the other thing too is just kind of saying that your job is a difficult one, and that I really think that the way to navigate the difficulties of what it means to practice is to seek the welfare of the hospital, of the city, of the community of where you are. Because I really do believe that in its welfare, therefore you will find your welfare. And so I think that it's really easy to have everything be about your work, but getting to know the custodial staff and the nurses and the people that are helping the hospital go is really going to be valuable for the rest of your training. And I think it's a good practice to have for the rest of your career, no matter what discipline you're going into. But really investing in the people and the place of where you are, even though it may be a foreign place. Maybe it's a place you're not excited about being. Maybe it's a place that you've always wanted to be, but you're not getting to experience it because everything's locked down in the midst of a pandemic. But still, that hospital, that institution, your residency program, all the GME community, investing in that, I think, is where you're going to find your welfare.
So like you, I'm an internal medicine primary care doctor myself. And one of the biggest transitions for me was just having a lot of experience with outpatient problems. Right out of residency, I felt more comfortable dealing with an MI than I did with a skin rash, for instance. Now, how was the transition for you? Because you're within your first few months of being a primary care internal medicine attending, especially in the midst of a pandemic. How has that transition been for you?
Yeah, no, you're spot on that I think our graduate medical education does focus a lot on inpatient medicine. I'm very thankful that I do feel like I had a lot of exposure with that at UVA, and I'm so thankful for my training there. But again, I think it's holding that uncertainty. Mm-hmm. Like you can order some labs in the hospital and they're back the next morning. You check labs every day, whether or not it's the right thing to do, because that's just the easiest thing to do next. But I think that, sending the patient out, maybe to see in 3 months, and really having to kind of trust that. And I think being honest with your patients about, hey, I'm gonna tell you how I'm thinking through this. I'm a human being just like you are, and I want so desperately to care for you as a whole person, but also that I may have to pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, I wasn't really thinking through that the right way. But I think that just having the humility to say that your work is always a work in progress. And I think it's okay to share that with your patients. And I've found that they're very appreciative of that. and just appreciate that little piece of vulnerability. But certainly holding the ambiguity in the outpatient setting is very different than the safety net of training. So there are times that I miss it, but I think I'm growing a lot more in practice.
We're talking to Sumner Abraham. He's an internal medicine physician, and he wrote the Kevin MD article, A Letter to Medical Interns in the Midst of a Pandemic. Sumner, is there something that you know now that you wish you knew back 8-9 months ago before the pandemic started?
Yeah, I mean, I've really thought a lot about this word lament. This idea that I can see a tragedy or an injustice or an infectious disease that is kind of taking over the world, and like be honest about that it's terrible, and that it's difficult, and that practicing evidence-based medicine without any evidence is impossible. But then also to hope that being able to be honest and really name what's happening while also still having a positive outlook and some hope is something that I've really wrestled with. But I do think that it is the antidote to this feeling like you're drowning in the midst of this. And I think that if I were to really lean into that concept as a trainee, I think that I would have been more fulfilled at times. This idea that you see these profound social injustices as a trainee, and it's really easy to get down about that, and it's really easy to just be sad. But I also think that you can simultaneously hope for a better healthcare system or a more equitable healthcare system, and you can do that at the same time. And I think that this pandemic has really just been a pressure cooker for that idea for me. But this idea that really I'm going to be a better physician if I learn to lament, and that is to simultaneously cry out and be truthful about kind of some of the hardships that we're facing, but also to really remain hopeful with what there is to come, because there is profound opportunity amidst this disruption.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
You know, I just think that it's really easy to find a lot of this idea that statistics can kind of be heartwarming. I think I kind of close out my article with that, or that there are a lot of hollow promises that I feel like that drugs and therapies can offer. As I go and see patients this afternoon, and as hopefully all the listeners go and really care for people, just what a cool job that we get to have to really come alongside people and walk through life with them. And I think just zooming out and having that 10,000 foot perspective, even in the midst with cases soaring and our healthcare system is as overwhelmed as it has been this whole entire year. There are people in front of you, and there are patient stories, and to lean into that and to take 2 or 3 extra minutes with each patient and just learn about their life, their hobbies, what makes them tick, and what their goals are, because I think that will sustain you not only now, but also in the future.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you so much.